This 4-year-old girl screamed for help every day, and nobody did anything until a millionaire knocked on the door. And this happened. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The sun was beginning to set in Harmony Creek, painting the sky in shades of orange over Maplewood Estates, when a piercing scream shattered the quiet of the afternoon. It was precisely 5:38 p.m., and like every day, young Lily, all of 6 years old, let her voice echo through the neighborhood. Her brown eyes, usually so lively, were now wide with terror as she huddled in the corner of the living room, trembling and clutching her knees. "Help me! Somebody! Please help!" she cried, but her voice was just another sound in the neighborhood's routine. Outside, Mrs. Gable, a 79-year-old woman who lived next door, just shook her head in disapproval as she watered her begonias. She was used to that spoiled brat, as she often told the other neighbors during afternoon coffee. Lily continued screaming, her small hands clutching tightly at the floral dress she wore as tears streamed down her childish face. In her mind, the walls of the room seemed to move, contorting into frightening shapes. She saw shadows dancing in the corners, hearing noises that no one else could hear. The terror was all too real for such a young child to bear alone. Upstairs, her Aunt Claire, a 38-year-old woman with deep, dark circles under her eyes and prematurely graying hair, lay in her darkened bedroom, completely oblivious to her niece's cries. The depression medication she was on left her in a state of semi-consciousness, unable to hear the desperate cries for help coming from downstairs. Claire had taken custody of Lily 2 years ago after a horrific accident that took her sister from this world. Since then, she had tried to balance her job as an elementary school teacher with caring for her niece, but the severe depression consuming her made that task increasingly impossible. Outside the house, Mr. Jenkins passed by, with his cart of homemade bread, the scent of yeast and cinnamon filling the afternoon air. He heard the screams like every day, but continued on his way, convinced it was just another child throwing a tantrum. "That girl needs a good spanking," he muttered to himself as he pushed his cart down the cobblestone street. That same afternoon, on the other side of town, a black, imposing car crossed the entrance to Harmony Creek. At the wheel was Damien Farrell, 42 years old, a man with a weary expression and an impeccable suit, returning to his hometown after 25 years living in Chicago. He had made his fortune with his textile recycling company, but professional success had taken its toll in the form of a messy divorce and a burnout his doctor called corporate fatigue. Damien had just bought the old Oakhaven Ranch, located just 2 miles from downtown. His plan was to find the peace there that Chicago could no longer offer him. As he drove through the familiar streets of his childhood, he decided to take a detour through Maplewood Estates, where he had grown up. That's when he heard it. Lily's scream pierced through the closed glass of his car, causing him to slam on the brakes. Something about that sound paralyzed him completely. It wasn't just any scream. There was genuine terror in that childish voice. A terror he knew all too well. Without thinking twice, Damien parked the car and walked towards the house from which the screams were coming. The old building, with its peeling paint and neglected garden, seemed to cry out for help as much as the child inside. He walked up the steps of the porch and knocked on the door, but no one answered. The screams continued. Damien knocked again, harder this time. After several minutes of insistence, he heard small, hesitant footsteps approaching. The door opened, slowly, revealing a small girl with disheveled brown hair and eyes red from crying so much. "My aunt is sleeping," said Lily, in a trembling voice and a frightening maturity for her age. "She can't hear me." Damien felt his heart clench. That scene brought back memories he had tried to bury for years, memories of his own daughter, who also suffered from a condition that no one understood, As he watched Lily's tear-streaked face, he realized he couldn't just walk away. "Are you okay?" he asked, crouching down to her level. "I heard your screams from the street." Lily hesitated, her small hands clutching the hem of her dress. "I see things," she whispered, as if confessing a terrible secret. "Things that scare me. The doctor said they're just nightmares. But it happens when I'm awake." At that moment, Mrs. Gable appeared at the gate, attracted by the presence of the stranger. "Who are you?" she asked with the typical suspicion of a small town. "What do you want with the girl?" Damien introduced himself, explaining that he was a former resident who had just returned to Harmony Creek. As they talked, Lily remained, standing at the door, her eyes darting between the unknown man and the shadows that were still dancing on the walls, visible only to her. What none of them knew was that this chance encounter would mark the beginning of a series of discoveries that would forever change not only the lives of Lily and her aunt, but of the entire small town of Harmony Creek. Behind the closed curtains of the upstairs bedroom, Claire remained in her medication-induced sleep, oblivious to the fact that her life was about to take a complete turn. On the street, the sun continued its path to the horizon, painting the clouds red, while the scent of Mr. Jenkins' bread mixed with the perfume of Mrs. Gable's begonias. It was just another afternoon in Maplewood Estates, but this time, someone had finally heard Lily's cries for help. Damien's presence at the door brought an uneasiness to Maplewood Estates that had long been unseen. Mrs. Gable, in her floral apron and worn slippers, approached closer, now visibly disturbed by the situation unfolding before her eyes. It wasn't common to see such a well-dressed man in this simple part of town, much less one who showed interest in the screams everyone had learned to ignore. "You said you used to live here?" she asked, adjusting the heavy-framed glasses on her wrinkled face. "Did you know the girl's parents?" Before Damien could answer, a noise from inside the house drew everyone's attention. Lily, who was still standing at the door, began to tremble violently. Her eyes widened in terror, fixed on something only she could see in the hallway behind her. "They're coming back," she whispered, her voice filled with terror. "The shadows, they're dancing again." Damien didn't hesitate. With the experience of someone who had been in a similar situation, he entered the house, ignoring Mrs. Gable's protests. The living room was dim, with heavy curtains blocking the evening light. The atmosphere smelled of mold and sadness, as if the house itself was sick. On the walls, old, dusty photographs silently told the story of a family that was once happy. Lily huddled in a corner, her small fingers clutching tightly at the peeling wallpaper. Her eyes remained fixed on something invisible, and her whole body trembled like a leaf in the wind. "They never left," she murmured, tears streaming down her childish face. "The doctor said I was lying, but they always come back at 5:38. Upstairs, finally, movement was heard. Claire, still groggy from the medication, appeared at the top of the stairs. Her disheveled hair and rumpled clothes betrayed that she had spent the entire afternoon in bed. Upon seeing a stranger in her living room, her eyes widened in panic. "Who are you? What are you doing in my house?" she asked, her voice hoarse and defensive. She tried to descend the stairs quickly, but her shaky legs betrayed her, causing her to lean heavily on the banister. "Miss Claire," Damien began, maintaining a respectful distance, "my name is Damien Farrell. I was passing by when I heard your niece's cries. She's having some kind of episode that seems very familiar to me." Claire reached the foot of the stairs, her face a mask of shame and fear. "Lily has nightmares," she said, repeating the simplistic diagnosis of the local doctor. "Dr. Peterson has already explained that it's normal for children who have experienced trauma." It was at this moment that Mr. Jenkins, who had returned with his bread cart upon hearing the commotion, entered through the still open door. "It's like this every day," he said, shaking his head. The girl screams like she's seeing the devil himself. Excuse my language. Damien observed carefully as Lily continued in her state of terror, completely oblivious to the adults' discussion around her. His professional eyes, accustomed to analyzing complex situations, noticed details that the others had ignored for so long. The specific pattern of the crises, always at the same time. The nature of the hallucinations which seemed to follow. A consistent script, and above all, the girl's physical reaction, which went beyond a simple childish fear. "Miss Clare," he said, his voice now charged with a controlled urgency, "your niece is not having common nightmares. What she describes sounds very much like a specific type of epilepsy that causes hallucinations. My daughter—" He paused, swallowing hard before continuing. "My daughter had very similar symptoms." The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Claire looked at Damien as if he had just spoken in a foreign language. Mrs. Gable, still standing at the door, brought her hands to her mouth, years of hasty judgments weighing on her conscience. Mr. Jenkins lowered his eyes to the ground, remembering the sweets he always gave the girl to brighten her day. "It can't be," murmured Claire, her voice trembling. "Dr. Peterson is the only neurologist in town. He said it was just trauma from the accident. He said it would pass." Damien approached Lily, who was still trembling in her corner. With gentle movements, he took a small notebook and pen from his pocket, offering them to the girl. "Can you draw what you're seeing now?" he asked gently. To everyone's surprise, Lily took the notebook with trembling hands and began to draw. Her strokes, although childish, revealed disturbing shapes, elongated shadows with defined contours, geometric patterns that repeated themselves, and in one corner of the page, a red car that seemed out of place in the visual chaos. Claire approached to see the drawing and paled visibly. The red car was identical to the one that had impacted her sister's vehicle on that fateful night, a detail that Lily had never mentioned before. "In Chicago," continued Damien, his voice now firmer, "I know a specialist in pediatric neurology, Dr. Eleanor Vance. She is one of the leading authorities in the country on cases like Lily's. I can schedule a consultation for tomorrow." It was at this moment that Claire's facade began to crumble. Her hands trembled as she leaned against the wall, her legs seeming unable to support her. "I can't," she whispered, tears beginning to stream down her face. "I can't afford a specialist in Chicago. I can barely keep the bills paid with my salary as a teacher." "Tite!" The sound of footsteps on the porch drew everyone's attention. A tall, imposing figure appeared at the door. It was Arthur Manning, the manager of the local bank. His impeccable suit and leather briefcase contrasted with the simplicity of the house. "Speaking of bills, Miss Clare," he said, his tone falsely cordial, "I came personally to discuss the situation of the home loan. The payments are 3 months behind." The panic in Claire's eyes was palpable. Lily, still in her corner, began to cry harder, as if she felt the tension that now filled the room. Damien observed the scene with growing interest. His mind sharpened for business, realizing that there was more to this story than met the eye. "Mr. Manning," said Claire, her voice barely above a whisper, "I can explain. With the costs of Lily's medication, and after they cut the extra shift at school—" Arthur raised a hand, interrupting her. "Explanations don't pay the debts, Ms. Claire. The bank has been more than patient, but there are limits." His cold eyes scanned the room, lingering for a moment on Damien before returning to Claire. "We have until the end of the month to regularize the situation, or we will have to take more severe measures." It was at this moment that Lily, still trembling, but now with her eyes focused on Arthur, said something that made everyone freeze. "He smells like the red car." Her childish voice carried a disturbing certainty. The car that hurt Mommy had that smell of cigarettes and expensive cologne. The silence that followed was deafening. Arthur Manning paled visibly, his hands clenching tightly on the handle of the leather briefcase. Damien looked from Lily to the bank manager, his mind connecting dots that no one else had noticed before. The small town of Harmony Creek held secrets much deeper than he imagined, and now, standing in that dusty living room in Maplewood Estates, he knew he could no longer turn back. Lily's innocent comment provoked a chain reaction that no one could have predicted. Arthur Manning quickly recovered his composure, but his eyes now burned with a disturbing intensity. He adjusted his tie in a nervous gesture and forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Children have such fertile imaginations, don't they?" he said, trying to sound casual, but his voice trembled slightly. "Miss Clare, we need to resolve this loan situation as soon as possible. How about we talk in private at the bank tomorrow?" Claire, still dazed by the medication and now by the situation, only nodded mechanically. Her hands were trembling so much that she had to lean on the wall. That's when Damien stepped forward, his imposing presence filling the room. "If you'll allow me, Mr. Manning, I'd like to understand this situation better," he said, his professional tone masking a growing suspicion. "I'm a businessman from Chicago and recently purchased Oak Haven Ranch. Perhaps we can find a solution that benefits everyone." The mention of Oak Haven Ranch made Arthur pale even more. He looked at Damien as if he were seeing him for the first time, sudden recognition in his eyes. "Ah, so you're the new owner," he said, trying to maintain his composure. "Interesting, very interesting." Mrs. Gable, who watched everything from the door with her attentive eyes of someone who had lived long enough to recognize when something is wrong, decided to intervene. "Lily, my dear, how about you come with me for some tea? I have those shortbread cookies you like so much." But before Lily could answer, Mr. Jenkins, who had remained quiet until then, stepped forward. "Better not give her anything sweet now," he said, surprising everyone with his seriousness. "I've noticed that after she eats the sweets I give her, the screams get worse." This observation caught Damien's attention immediately. "What kind of sweets?" he asked, his mind working quickly. "Oh, those colorful ones that children love so much," replied Mr. Jenkins, scratching his head. "I use red dye to make the sprinkles look prettier." "Red dye?" Damien murmured, more to himself than to the others. His daughter had similar reactions to certain types of food coloring. It was one of the most common triggers for her seizures. At that moment, Lily, who seemed calmer, approached Damien and tugged on the hem of his jacket. "The shadows get angrier when I eat red things," she said, with that disconcerting wisdom that children sometimes demonstrate. "But nobody believes me." Claire covered her face with her hands, sobbing softly. "I'm a terrible aunt," she murmured. "I can't even take care of her properly. First the screams I couldn't hear, now this about the sweets, and on top of that, I'm going to lose the house." It was then that the sound of a car screeching to a halt on the street drew everyone's attention. Through the window, they saw an old beat-up Chevette parked in front of the house. From the driver's seat emerged a man of unkempt appearance, staggering towards the door. "No," whispered Claire, her face losing all color. "It's Roger." "Your ex-husband?" asked Damien, remembering the mention Claire had made earlier about a difficult divorce. "Claire!" Roger's altered voice echoed through the street. "We need to talk about those documents." Lily ran behind Damien, clinging to his legs. "He was there too," she whispered, trembling. "On the day of the accident, he followed Mommy's car." Arthur Manning took a step towards the door, clearly anxious to leave, but Damien blocked his path with a subtle movement. "I think we all need to have a very serious conversation," he said, his voice calm but firm. Roger stumbled through the door, smelling of alcohol. His bloodshot eyes scanned the room, lingering first on Claire, then on Arthur, and finally on Damien. "Who are you?" he asked aggressively. "I'm someone very interested in understanding why a 6-year-old child has such specific memories about a car accident," replied Damien, standing between Roger and the others. and why the local bank manager is so disturbed by the mention of a red car. It was at this moment that Mrs. Gable let out a muffled exclamation. "Wait a minute," she said, her eyes wide behind her glasses. "Now I remember. On the day of the accident, I was coming back from the market when I saw a red car speeding, and it had a bank sticker on the back." Arthur made a brusque movement towards the door, but Damien was faster. With a precise movement, he grabbed the manager's arm. "I think you have a lot to explain," he said. "Let go of me," demanded Arthur, trying to break free. "This is absurd. They're just coincidences." "Coincidences?" Claire's voice trembled. "How is it a coincidence that you show up demanding payment for the house just when I discovered those old documents in the attic?" "What documents?" asked Damien, his interest piqued. "My mother's documents," replied Claire, gaining strength in her voice. "Josephine Santos. Everyone thinks she went to Portugal, but—" "Enough!" shouted Arthur, finally managing to break free. "You have no proof of anything." It was then that Lily, still clinging to Damien's legs, said something that made everyone freeze. "Grandma didn't leave. She's hidden. I heard Aunt Claire crying on the phone with her yesterday." The silence that followed was deafening. Roger, who had leaned against the wall to balance himself, began to laugh hysterically. "So that's why you were acting so strange, Claire. Did you find out that your mother didn't run away at all?" "Shut up, Roger!" shouted Claire, tears streaming down her face. "You don't know nothing." "I know more than you think," he replied, his drunken smile turning into a dark expression. "I know about the documents that Arthur forged to seize your father's lands. I know about the deal he made with your mother to keep her quiet, and I know very well why your sister had that accident." At that moment, Mr. Jenkins, who had discreetly left a few minutes before, returned accompanied by 2 local police officers. "I thought it was best to call for backup," he said, his voice trembling. "There's a lot of wrong going on here." Damien watched the scene unfold like a tragic play. In less than 2 hours, the buried secrets of Harmony Creek were beginning to surface, like bubbles rising to the top of a deep lake. But something told him that what they had discovered so far was just the tip of the iceberg. Lily, still clinging to him, looked at everyone with her big, scared eyes. "The shadows are different now," she whispered. "They're showing things that happened before." And so, as the sun completely set over Maplewood Estates, the police officers began to take initial statements. No one noticed the small piece of paper that fell from Arthur's pocket during the confusion. An old receipt from a private clinic in a neighboring town, with the name Josephine Santos clearly visible on the letterhead. Night fell on Harmony Creek as the small-town police station buzzed with unusual activity. Chief Tony Silver, a man in his mid-50s with graying hair at his temples, looked perplexed at the group gathered in his office. Claire was sitting in a chair, still trembling, but now with a determined look on her pale face. Lily slept peacefully in her lap, exhausted after the day's events. Damien remained standing, his suit now rumpled after the scuffle, but his posture remained firm and attentive. In an adjacent room, Arthur Manning and Roger were being interrogated separately. The clinic receipt found on the floor of Claire's house lay on the chief's desk, along with a growing stack of documents that were beginning to tell a disturbing story. "So, you're telling me," began the chief, adjusting his reading glasses, "that your mother, Josephine Santos, never went to Portugal, that she's been in a clinic all these years?" Claire nodded, stroking Lily's hair as she spoke. "I found out 3 months ago, when I found some old documents in the attic. My mother developed early-onset Alzheimer's, but it wasn't just that. She started saying things about forged documents, about stolen lands. No one believed her. They thought it was the disease talking." Mrs. Gable, who had insisted on accompanying everything as a witness, interrupted with her trembling voice of indignation. I remember when Josephine started acting different. It was soon after her husband, the late Joe Santos, lost almost all of his land in deals with the bank. She said something was wrong, that the papers didn't add up. The chief flipped through an old folder, his eyes narrowing with each page. These farm documents, there's something very strange here. The signatures don't seem consistent. It was then that Mr. Jenkins, who was sitting quietly in a corner, cleared his throat to get attention. "Chief, there's something you need to know. 20 years ago, when I was still working at my father's bakery, Arthur used to come in every morning. He always carried a briefcase full of papers and met with a man in the back of the bakery. I thought it was strange at the time, but who was I to question it?" Damien approached the desk, his eyes fixed on the documents. "When I bought Oakhaven Ranch, I noticed some irregularities in the documentation, but I thought it was just old bureaucracy. Now, connecting the dots." He paused, picking up one of the papers. "Look at this, Chief. The date on this document. It's impossible for it to have been signed on that day." "Why?" asked the Chief, leaning in to see better. "Because I remember that day perfectly," replied Mrs. Gable, her eyes shining with the memory. "It was the day of the big storm, when the town lost power for 3 days. The bank was closed. There was no way anyone could have signed anything there. At that moment, a police officer rushed into the room. 'Chief, you need to see this. We just received a call from Santa Martha Clinic in Hillsdale. Ms. Josephine Santos is asking to speak to her daughter. She's having a moment of lucidity.' Claire jumped up, holding Lily carefully so as not to wake her. 'I need to go there, now.' 'I'll take you,' offered Damien immediately. 'My car is outside.' The chief nodded in agreement. 'I'll send 2 officers to accompany you. This is all starting to make a very disturbing sense.' As they prepared to leave, a scream echoed from the interrogation room. It was Roger, his voice choked with alcohol and despair. "She needs to know. Claire needs to know the truth about her sister's accident." The chief signaled for 2 officers to restrain him. Claire, already at the door, turned around with wide eyes. "What truth, Roger? What do you know about my sister's accident?" Roger laughed, a bitter and broken sound. "Why do you think I drank so much today? It's the anniversary, Claire. The anniversary of the day Arthur asked me to follow your sister. She had discovered something. She was threatening to tell everything." Before he could continue, Arthur, from the other room, began to shout. "He's drunk! You can't believe a word he says!" The chief stood up, his expression more serious than ever. "Take them both to separate cells. No one talks to anyone until I get back." In the car, on the way to Hillsdale, Lily woke up briefly. Her sleepy eyes scanned the interior of the vehicle until they settled on something through the window. "Look, Aunt Claire," she murmured. "The shadows are following us, but now they look different. They seem like they want to show something." Claire hugged her niece tighter, silent tears streaming down her face. Damien, focused on driving, watched the city lights fade into the distance through the rearview mirror. The night was clear, with a full moon illuminating the winding road that cut through the mountains of West Virginia. "There's something you need to know," said Claire, her voice low but firm. "I found more things in the attic besides the documents. There was a diary, my father's diary. He wrote about a safe hidden somewhere on Oakhaven Ranch. He said he kept there the evidence of everything Arthur had done." Damien gripped the steering wheel tighter. "That's why Arthur was so interested when he found out I bought the farm. But there's more," continued Claire, her voice trembling. "On the day of the accident, my sister had called me. She was euphoric. She said she had found something, that she could finally prove everything. She said she was coming to meet me." She stopped, choking back a sob. "She never arrived." One of the officers accompanying them, Sergeant Oliver, leaned forward. "Miss Claire, are you saying that your sister may have been, that the accident may not have been an accident?" Before she could answer, Lily spoke, her childish voice laden with a frightening certainty. "The red car didn't let Mommy pass. It Stayed in front, then behind, then in front again. I saw everything from the back seat. The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Damien realized that his hands were trembling on the steering wheel. Lily's visions, which everyone had dismissed as hallucinations caused by trauma and epilepsy, were beginning to take on a much darker meaning. The moon continued its path across the sky, casting elongated shadows across the road. Somewhere ahead, in a clinic in Hillsdale, Josephine Santos waited with temporary lucidity, holding crucial pieces of a puzzle that had begun more than 20 years ago. In the back seat, Lily fell asleep again, her small hand holding tightly to the necklace her mother always wore. A necklace that, unbeknownst to anyone yet, held within it a small, rusty key, the key to the safe mentioned in her grandfather's diary. Meanwhile, back at the Harmony Creek police station, Chief Silver received an urgent call from the registry office in the neighboring town. The voice on the other end of the line trembled as they reported a disturbing discovery. All the land transfer documents signed by Joe Santos in the last months before his departure from this world had something in common. They were registered by the same notary, who had mysteriously disappeared soon after, leaving behind only a locked briefcase in his office, a briefcase that had just been found during a renovation in the building. Santa Martha Clinic stood imposingly against the starry sky of Hillsdale, its white walls reflecting the soft glow of the moon. The group arrived shortly after 10 at night, the fresh mountain air carrying a scent of eucalyptus. As they crossed the parking lot, Lily, still sleepy in her aunt's arms, pointed to one of the windows on the 3rd floor. "It's there," she said with conviction, her eyes fixed on a specific window where a yellowish light shone solitarily on the facade of the building. "Grandma is there. The shadows are showing me." Claire exchanged a meaningful look with Damien. It was impossible for Lily to know where her grandmother was. She had never been there before. Sergeant Oliver made some notes in his notebook, increasingly intrigued by the coincidences that were piling up. At the front desk, they were greeted by Dr. Beverly Meade, a middle-aged neurologist with kind eyes and a worried expression. "Ms. Claire," she began, consulting a clipboard, "your mother is having one of the most lucid moments in recent years, but I need to warn you, these moments are rare and may not last long." "How long do we have?" asked Damien, his professional tone masking the urgency he felt. "It's impossible to say," replied the doctor, guiding them through the silent corridors. "But there's something different this time." She started talking about documents, about a safe, about injustices that need to be corrected. I've never seen her so focused since she arrived here. As they went up to the 3rd floor, Claire held Lily tightly, as if the girl were her anchor to reality. The walls of the hospital seemed to whisper secrets, each step echoing in the sepulchral silence of the corridor. As they turned a corner, they found a man in a white coat rushing out of Josephine's room. He bumped into Damien, muttering a quick apology before disappearing down the emergency stairs. "Strange," commented Dr. Meade, frowning. "I don't recognize that doctor." Sergeant Oliver immediately spoke into his radio, ordering them to check the stairs. But Lily, who had fully awakened, stared fixedly in the direction in which the man had disappeared. "He had the same smell," she whispered, "just like at the bank." Damien felt a chill run down his spine. "Quick," he said. "We need to see Miss Josephine now." Upon entering the room, they found Josephine Santos sitting in her bed, her white hair perfectly combed, her clear eyes shining with a lucidity that contrasted with her usual confusion. Upon seeing Claire, a smile lit up her weathered face. "My daughter," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "You finally came. They tried to make me forget, but some things are kept so deep that not even time can erase them." Claire rushed to hug her mother, tears streaming freely down her face. Lily, now on the floor, cautiously approached the bed. her big eyes fixed on the grandmother she had never met. "And you must be little Lily," said Josephine, extending a trembling hand to her granddaughter. "You have your mother's eyes, and her gift too, from what I see." "What gift?" asked Claire, surprised. Josephine smiled, a sad and knowing smile. "The gift of seeing beyond the shadows, my dear. Your sister had it too. That's why she found out everything, you know? She saw things that others couldn't see. She saw the truth behind the lies." At that moment, Sergeant Oliver returned to the room, his face tense. "The man got away," he reported, "but we found this in the hallway." In his hand was a crumpled piece of paper, a receipt from the Harmony Creek Bank with Arthur Manning's signature. "He came to try to make me forget again," said Josephine, her voice now stronger. "But not this time. This time I'm going to tell everything." She paused, her eyes scanning each face in the room, before continuing. "It started 23 years ago when my husband discovered the fraud at the bank." Over the next hour, Josephine unraveled a story that left everyone stunned. Joe Santos, her husband, was a meticulous man who kept records of everything. When he began to notice discrepancies in the bank documents related to the lands in the region, he launched a private investigation. He discovered a complex scheme involving Arthur Manning and several other bank employees, who forged documents to appropriate land from traditional families in the region. "But it wasn't just that," continued Josephine, her voice trembling. "They had a bigger plan. They knew that those lands, especially Oakhaven Ranch, held a valuable secret, something my husband discovered during a renovation on the farm." "What did they find?" asked Damien, leaning forward. "Water," replied Josephine. "A source of pure mineral water, richer than any other in the region. My husband discovered that it fed all the artesian wells within a radius of miles. Whoever controlled that source would control the water supply for half of southern West Virginia." Claire covered her mouth with her hands, remembering her sister's words on the last phone call. That's why she was so excited that day. She had discovered something about the water. Josephine nodded, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. "Your sister found the original documents that proved everything. They were hidden in the safe that Joe built, disguised in one of the old walls of the farm. She called me that morning, said she could finally prove all the irregularities." "And Roger?" asked Claire, her voice barely above a whisper. "What was his role in all this?" "Ah, my daughter," sighed Josephine. "Your ex-husband was just a pawn in Arthur's game. He used him to keep you under control, to have access to our family. Roger drank too much, owed money to the bank. It was easy for Arthur to manipulate him." Lily, who had been sitting quietly until then, approached Josephine's bed. "Grandma," she said, her childish voice laden with a seriousness beyond her years, "the shadows are different here. They're trying to show something. It looks like a drawing on the wall." Josephine smiled, reaching out to touch her granddaughter's face. "You see, don't you? Just like your mother saw. The gift passes from generation to generation in our family. They're not hallucinations, dear. It's a special gift, the ability to see beyond what others see." Dr. Meade, who had remained silent observing everything, cleared her throat softly. "Miss Josephine, Miss Lily has been diagnosed with a rare type of epilepsy." "No," interrupted Josephine, her voice firm. "It's more than that. Much more. Why do you think they kept me here all these years? They needed to make me forget what I could also see, the medications, the treatments, all to cloud my mind, to make me doubt what I knew was true." At that moment, Lily walked to one of the walls of the room, her small fingers tracing an invisible pattern on the wallpaper. "Here," she said. "There's something in here." Damien approached, examining the wall carefully. There was a subtle difference in the texture at one specific point. Carefully, he pressed the area, feeling something move beneath the paper. "The safe on the farm," said Josephine, her eyes shining. "Joe built it the same way. He was an engineer, you know. He had a special way of hiding things. Sergeant Oliver approached with a small knife and carefully cut the wallpaper. Behind it, there was a small cavity, and inside it, a yellowed envelope. "The copies," whispered Josephine, tears streaming down her face. "I hid them here on the day they brought me in. I knew someone would come looking one day." Claire opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside, there were documents, old photos, and a detailed map of Oakhaven Ranch, with specific markings indicating the location of the original safe and the water source. "My sister," said Claire, her voice choked. "She was going to show me this? Was that what she had discovered?" "Yes," replied Josephine. "She found the original evidence, but there was more. Something that even I didn't know at the time. Something she discovered about Arthur, about the real reason why he wanted those lands so badly." Before she could continue, Josephine blinked several times, her expression beginning to become confused. Dr. Mead approached quickly, checking her vital signs. "The moment of lucidity is passing," she said urgently. "If there's anything else, you need to know. It needs to be now." Josephine grabbed Claire's hand with surprising strength. "The necklace," she said, her voice beginning to fail. "Your sister's necklace. Lily still has it?" Lily brought her hand to her neck, pulling out the necklace she always wore. "This one, Grandma." "The key," whispered Josephine, her eyes beginning to lose focus. "The key is inside. She put it there. To protect—" Her words began to become confused, her lucidity slipping away like water between her fingers. But before diving back into her world of confusion, she looked directly at Damien. "Take care of them," she whispered. "Arthur won't stop. He needs to stop." The truth about the water, about what really happened to Joe, about— Her voice faded away, her eyes losing the glimmer of understanding. In a matter of seconds, Josephine returned to being the confused patient she had been for the past years, looking at everyone with a vague and distant expression. Lily, still holding the necklace, stared fixedly at her grandmother. "The shadows are different now," she said softly. "They're sad." Outside the hospital, the night had deepened, and a fine drizzle was beginning to fall. At the Harmony Creek, Police Station Chief Silver received yet another crucial piece of information. The man they had seen leaving Josephine's room was not a doctor. It was Richard Manning, Arthur's brother, who had been missing for 20 years after a disagreement with the family. And at Oakhaven Ranch, protected by the darkness of the night, someone moved silently between the old walls, desperately looking for a safe that held secrets capable of forever changing the destiny of Harmony Creek and everyone involved in that story. The return to Harmony Creek was silent, with the drizzle turning into a persistent rain that drummed on the roof of the car. Lily had fallen asleep again, her mother's necklace firmly secured in her small hand. Claire looked out the window, her mind a whirlwind of memories and revelations, while Damien drove focused on the slippery road. Sergeant Oliver, in the passenger seat, spoke in a low voice on the radio, relaying the latest discoveries to Chief Silver. The information about Richard Manning had stirred the already turbulent waters of the case even further. "Ms. Claire," called the sergeant, switching off the radio, "do you remember Richard Manning, Arthur's brother?" Claire frowned, rummaging through her memories. "Vaguely. He worked in exports, if I remember correctly. He disappeared suddenly many years ago. They said he had gone abroad." "He didn't disappear," said a sleepy voice. Lily had woken up and was looking at everyone with her sleepy eyes. "He's in the shadows too. He's always been around, but no one could see him." A shiver ran down the spine of everyone in the car. Damien adjusted the rearview mirror to get a better look at the girl. "What else do you see in the shadows, Lily?" "There's a man on the farm now," she replied, her childish voice laden with certainty. "He's looking for something in the walls. He's scared, very scared." Sergeant Oliver immediately grabbed his radio again, ordering a patrol car to be sent. To Oakhaven Ranch. Damien gripped the steering wheel tighter, fighting against the urge to speed up on the wet road. "There's something you need to know," said Claire, her voice trembling slightly. "Something I've never told anyone. On the day of the accident, I wasn't at home when my sister called. I was at the bank, trying to renegotiate the house debts. I saw Arthur leaving in a hurry, talking on the phone. He seemed nervous, agitated, and he had a fresh scratch on his face, as if he had been in a fight." "What time was it?" asked the sergeant, his notepad already in hand. "Shortly after 3, in the afternoon," replied Claire, closing her eyes as if she could see the scene again. "I remember because I looked at the clock in the square when I left the bank. 15 minutes later, I received the news of the accident." "The red car," murmured Lily, now fully awake. "There were 2 men inside, one driving, the other in the back seat. They followed us from the entrance to the town." Damien felt his heart race. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together in a disturbing way. "The safe," he said, thoughtfully. "Your sister must have found something more than just documents about the water, something that scared Arthur enough to take drastic measures." At that moment, the sergeant's radio crackled. Chief Silver's voice sounded urgent. "Oliver, you need to know this. We just received an anonymous tip. Someone left an envelope at the police station with old photos. They're from a meeting at Oakhaven Ranch 20 years ago. Arthur is in the photos, along with Richard and, you won't believe it, the former mayor of the town." "My father was at that meeting," said Claire suddenly, her voice filled with realization. "He told me, a few days before he left this world. He said he had discovered something terrible, something that went beyond the land fraud, but he never told me what it was." The rain increased in intensity, turning the road into a black mirror that reflected the car's headlights. In the darkness, Lily let out a muffled exclamation. "The necklace," she said, turning the pendant in her hands. "There's something inside it. I can feel it. The shadows are showing me how to open it." With small and skillful fingers, Lily manipulated the pendant until a soft click was heard. The secret compartment opened, revealing not only a small key, but also a microchip folded carefully. "Your mother was smarter than we imagined," said Damien, a sad smile on his face. "She didn't just keep the key to the safe. She kept something more." Sergeant Oliver examined the microchip carefully. "That explains why Arthur was so desperate to prevent your sister from reaching you, Miss Claire. She wasn't just carrying the key to the safe, but probably digital evidence too." Lily, who was still holding the empty necklace, frowned. "There's more," she said. "The shadows are restless. There's something happening at the farm now, something bad." As if to confirm her words, the sergeant's radio came back to life. "Attention! All units! Fire alarm triggered at Oakhaven Ranch. Firefighters en route." Damien slammed on the brakes, causing the car to skid slightly on the wet track before making a sharp turn. "They're trying to destroy the evidence," he said, his voice tense. "But there's something they don't know. When I bought the farm, I installed security cameras in every corner. They're connected directly to my cell phone." Quickly, he parked the car on the shoulder and took out his smartphone. The security camera. Images showed a hooded figure moving through the corridors of the farm, carrying what appeared to be a gallon of fuel. "Wait," said Claire, leaning in to see better. "That way of walking, I'd recognize it anywhere. It's Roger." "No," interrupted Lily, her eyes fixed on the screen. "It's not just him. There's another man there. He's in the shadows, waiting. It's the same man from the hospital." Sergeant Oliver was already on the radio again, directing the patrol cars to the farm. But Damien knew they were too far away to prevent whatever was about to happen. It was then that Lily let out a sharp cry. "The wall!" she exclaimed. "They found the right wall. The safe is behind it. The shadows are trying to show me there's something else in there, something that nobody knows." Claire hugged her niece tightly, while Damien accelerated again, defying the rain and the treacherous road. On the horizon, an orange glow began to tint the night sky. The first flames were beginning to consume Oakhaven Ranch. What no one knew yet was that on that same night, Mrs. Gable, unable to sleep after the day's events, had decided to organize her old boxes of photographs. Among them, she found a picture yellowed by time that froze a crucial moment, a night meeting at Oakhaven Ranch 20 years ago. In the photo, partially hidden in the shadows, was Richard Manning handing something to Joe Santos. Something that looked like an envelope, identical to the one Josephine had hidden on the hospital wall. And in the back of the car, Lily held firmly to her mother's empty necklace, her eyes fixed on something only she could see. The shadows danced around her, more agitated than ever, trying to reveal a secret that had remained buried for 2 decades. A secret that went far beyond fraudulent documents and water sources. A secret that would explain why Richard Manning had faked his own disappearance and why Arthur had spent so much time building his empire of lies in Harmony Creek. The truth, as the shadows were trying to show Lily, was much more disturbing than anyone could imagine. And as the fire began to consume the old farm, someone watched from afar, a satisfied smile on their face, unaware that the real evidence was never in the safe. It was hidden in a place that no one would ever think to look, protected by a code that only someone with the special gift of the Santos family would be able to decipher. The glow of the fire lit up the night sky of Harmony Creek like a sinister dawn, reflecting in the puddles of rain that were now falling more weakly. When Damien's car finally arrived at the entrance to Oakhaven Ranch, 3 fire trucks were already fighting the flames that were consuming the east wing of the property. Chief Silver was on the scene, coordinating police officers who formed a perimeter around the area. "They're still in there!" shouted Lily suddenly, her face pressed against the car window. "The man from the hospital. He's looking for something in the basement. The shadows are showing me." Damien exchanged a quick look with Sergeant Oliver. "Is there really a basement on the farm?" asked the officer, already drawing his radio. "Not officially," replied Damien, parking the car at a safe distance. "But when I bought the property, I found old blueprints that showed an underground area. It had been sealed for years. I couldn't get access." Claire, who watched the flames with horror, held Lily closer to her. "My father used to talk about a secret place on the farm," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "He said it was where he kept his greatest treasures. We thought it was just a story to entertain us." And at that moment, Chief Silver approached the group, his face lit by the orange reflection of the flames. "We just arrested Roger," he reported, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "We found him trying to escape through the back of the property. He's completely distraught, babbling something about Richard Manning and a hidden archive." "The microchip," murmured Damien, taking the small object from the pocket where he had stored it. "We need to find out what's on here." It was then that Lily let out another of her characteristic screams, but this time it was different. It wasn't a scream of fear, but of recognition. "The music!" she exclaimed, her eyes wide. "The shadows are singing the music that Grandpa used to sing." Claire paled. "My God," she whispered. "The music of the safe. Dad always hummed a specific melody when he talked about his secrets. He said it was the key to everything." "Miss Claire," called an elderly and breathless voice. Mrs. Gable came running as much as her legs would allow, holding an old shoebox. "I need to show you something. I found these photos." But before she could continue, a deafening crash shook the property. One of the walls of the farm had collapsed, revealing a dark passage behind the flames. "There!" shouted Lily, pointing. "It's the entrance to the basement. The man from the hospital is down there. He found what he was looking for." Chief Silver immediately mobilized his men, but the firefighters warned that the structure was too unstable for any attempt to enter. It was then that Damien noticed something in the security camera images on his cell phone. "There's another entrance," he exclaimed, "on the west side through the old well." Mrs. Gable, still holding her box of photographs, nodded vigorously. "The well! Of course! That's how Joe Santos went in and out without anyone noticing. It's in the photos I found!" Quickly, she opened the box and spread several old photographs on the hood of the car. One of them showed Joe Santos next to the well, with a mysterious smile on his face. In the background, partially visible, was a metal door disguised in the stone structure. "The music!" insisted Lily, pulling on her aunt's sleeve. "Grandpa used the music to open the door. The shadows are showing me." Claire closed her eyes, trying to remember the melody that her father hummed so much. Slowly, she began to hum a sequence of notes. Lily immediately joined her, as if the shadows were guiding her childish voice. "It's a code!" exclaimed Damien, observing the pattern of the notes. "The notes must correspond to a numerical sequence." Chief Silver was already running towards the well, followed by 2 police officers. When they arrived at the old structure, they found exactly what the photo showed: a metal door skillfully camouflaged with an old but functional numerical panel. 8 numbers, said the chief, examining the panel. "We need the exact sequence." It was then that Mrs. Gable let out an exclamation. Among the scattered photos, there was one that showed Joe Santos at the piano, with a sheet of music clearly visible. On the margin of the photo, a faded annotation read, "The key to everything is in the music of the heart." Claire and Lily continued, humming the melody, their voices mingling in the agitated night. Sergeant Oliver, who had musical knowledge, began to write down the notes. "Do, mi, sol, do, re, la, si, fa," he murmured. "If we turn it into numbers based on the scale, 1, 3, 5, 1, 2, 6, 7, 4, shouted Damien, already typing the sequence on the panel. With a metallic click and a hiss of compressed air, the door opened, revealing a staircase that descended into the darkness. The smell of smoke was beginning to infiltrate, even there, indicating that they didn't have much time. "He's down there," said Lily, her voice trembling. "He's holding something. It looks like an old book, and there's something else, a small box." Chief Silver and his men quickly descended the stairs, flashlights in hand. The basement was a surprisingly large space, with several dusty shelves and metal files lined up on the walls. In one corner, they found Richard Manning, holding exactly what Lily had described, an old ledger and a small metal box. He offered no resistance when the police officers arrested him. "It's over, Richard," said the chief. "There's nowhere else to run." Richard smiled, a sad and tired smile. "You don't understand," he said. "It was never about the lands or the water. It was about this." He raised the book. "Joe Santos discovered something much bigger, something that my brother Arthur would do anything to keep buried." While the police officers led Richard out, Damien quickly examined the book. Its pages were filled with detailed notes, numbers, and names. But what caught his attention was a series of photographs attached between the pages. "My God," he whispered, looking at the images. "This explains everything. The reason for Richard's disappearance, Arthur's obsession with the lands. It was all connected to this. Upstairs, the flames continued consuming parts of the farm, but the firefighters were finally able to control them." Claire hugged Lily, who stared fixedly at the shadows projected by the fire. "They're different now," said the girl. "The shadows, they're calmer, as if they're satisfied." Mrs. Gable, still holding her precious photographs, smiled at the little girl. "You know, dear," she said, "your mother used to say the same thing when she was your age. She also saw things in the shadows, and she was always right." At that moment, as the night wore on and the flames slowly died out, no one noticed a small detail. On the necklace that Lily was still holding, there was a tiny inscription on the Inside, visible only when it reflected the light from a certain angle, it was a sequence of numbers, different from the one they had used to open the basement door. The shadows knew there was still one last secret to be revealed, a secret that would forever change not only the history of Harmony Creek, but the lives of all involved. And only Lily, with her special gift, would be able to decipher it. The early morning hours were approaching when the group finally arrived at the Harmony Creek police station. The old building, normally silent at that hour, buzzed with activity. Richard Manning was being interrogated in one room, while Roger, still in shock, muttered incoherently in his cell. Arthur remained silent in another cell, his face an impenetrable mask of forced calm. Claire, exhausted but unable to rest, watched through the glass of the interrogation room as Chief Silver questioned Richard. Lily had finally fallen asleep, on the couch in the reception area, still holding tightly to her mother's necklace. Damien was hunched over a makeshift table, carefully examining the ledger found in the basement with the help of Sergeant Oliver. "Here," said Damien, pointing to a specific entry. 23 years ago, Joe Santos recorded a strange transfer. A significant amount of money was moved to an account in the Cayman Islands, but the record was made in a coded way. Mrs. Gable, who had insisted on remaining with the group, spread her old photographs on another table. "Look at this," she called, raising a yellowed photo. "This was taken in the week before Joe started acting strange. There are more people in the picture besides Arthur and Richard." Chief Silver momentarily left the interrogation to examine the photograph. In it, a group of men was gathered in what appeared to be the farm office. In addition to the Manning brothers and Joe Santos, there were 3 other partially visible figures. "Wait a moment," said Claire, approaching. "That one in the corner, isn't that Dr. Bowman, the former director of the bank?" "Dr. Bowman," repeated Sergeant Oliver, frowning. "His name appears several times in this ledger, always associated with international transfers." It was at that moment that Lily woke up, startled, her eyes wide. "In the dim light of the police station, the shadows," she exclaimed. "They're trying to show something on the necklace." Everyone turned to the girl, who was now holding the necklace under the fluorescent light. The tiny inscription on the inside shone faintly. "They're coordinates," said Damien, examining the numbers. "And there's something else. It looks like a sequence of letters and numbers." "It's the file code," exclaimed Richard from the interrogation room, his voice muffled by the glass. "The file that Joe Santos hid in the bank system." Chief Silver quickly returned to the interrogation room. "What file?" he asked, his voice filled with urgency. Richard ran his hands over his tired face before answering. Joe Santos wasn't just a clever farmer, he was a genius with numbers, and more importantly, with computer systems. When he discovered the irregularities in the bank, he created a special program, a program that automatically recorded all suspicious transactions in a hidden file. "That's why Arthur wanted the land so badly," he continued, his voice trembling. "It wasn't for the water, although that was a convenient bonus. It was for access to the antiquated system of the bank that still operated on the farm. Joe had connected everything. The file is hidden somewhere on the network, protected by multiple layers of security." Claire covered her mouth with her hands, remembering something. "The old computer in the attic," she exclaimed. "Dad never let anyone throw away that old machine. He said it was his greatest security." Lily, who had silently approached the group, stared fixedly at Richard through the glass. "The shadows around him are different," she said. "They're not scary like the others. They're sad." Richard turned his tired eyes to the girl. "You have the same gift as your mother," he said softly. "She could also see beyond appearances. That's why Arthur feared her so much. She could see the truth, even when it was hidden in the shadows." "Why did you fake your own disappearance?" asked the chief. "To protect Joe," replied Richard, tears beginning to form in his eyes. "He came to me when he discovered the truth. about the bank scheme. It wasn't just land fraud, it was international money laundering on a grand scale. Politicians, businessmen, powerful people, everyone was involved. At that moment, a young police officer ran into the police station. "Chief, we found something in Mr. Arthur's car. A briefcase with old documents hidden in the lining of the trunk." Chief Silver quickly examined the documents. His eyes widened as he read. "They're contracts," he said. "Contracts to buy silence. One of them is with the doctor, who wrongly diagnosed Ms. Josephine's condition. The doctor was paid to keep her sedated," said Richard, his voice filled with guilt, "to make everyone believe that she was going crazy. She could also see the hidden truths, like her granddaughter." Claire staggered, needing to lean against the wall. "So all this time, my mother was lucid? You deliberately drugged her?" "It was Arthur's idea," continued Richard. "He discovered that certain people in the Santos family had this special gift, the ability to see beyond appearances, to perceive hidden truths. He was afraid of that gift, afraid of what you might discover." Lily, still holding the necklace, approached the glass again. "You helped hide the evidence," she said, her childish voice laden with a wisdom beyond her years. "But you also helped protect it. You were the one who put the chip in my mother's necklace." Richard nodded slowly. "Your mother discovered the truth a few days before the accident. I tried to warn her about the danger. I gave her the chip with the evidence, but Arthur found out." "And Roger?" asked Claire. "What was his role in all this?" "A pawn," replied Richard bitterly. "Arthur manipulated him with gambling debts and threats. On the day of the accident, he was only supposed to follow your sister, find out where she was going. But Arthur had other plans." At that moment, the sound of glass breaking echoed through the police station. In the cell next door, Arthur had punched the small window, cutting his hand. His face, once impassive, was now contorted into a mask of fury and despair. "You don't understand," he shouted. "I built all this, decades of work, of planning. I couldn't let a woman with mystical visions destroy everything." "They weren't mystical visions," said Lily calmly, turning to, "Look at him. It was the truth. The shadows never lie." It was then that Mrs. Gable let out an exclamation. Among her photographs, she had found something extraordinary. An old photo of Josephine Santos as a young woman, sitting at the piano on the farm. On the sheet music in front of her, partially visible, was annotated the same sequence of numbers that appeared on the necklace. "The archive!" exclaimed Damien. "It's not just on the bank system. Joe Santos created backup copies. And he used the music, the same music he used as a password, to hide the coordinates." Chief Silver immediately began organizing a team to verify the coordinates. But Lily, still looking at the shadows that only she could see, had an intrigued expression on her face. "There's more," she said softly. "The shadows are showing another place, a place that no one knows yet. And there's something there, something that will change everything." As the early morning hours advanced over Harmony Creek, no one noticed a crucial detail in Mrs. Gable's photographs. In one of them, partially visible in the reflection of a mirror, there was an image of what appeared to be an old chapel on the Santos property. A chapel that was not on any official farm plan, and whose coordinates coincided exactly with the numbers hidden in the necklace. Dawn found the group on the old Santos property, an area that had not been included in the fraudulent negotiations and had remained abandoned for years. The rain had completely stopped, leaving only a fine mist that hung over the field like a ghostly veil. Claire, Damien, Lily, and Mrs. Gable were accompanied by Chief Silver and a small investigative team. Sergeant Oliver had remained at the police station, continuing the interrogation of Richard Manning, who was now fully cooperating with the authorities. The revelations of the early morning had left everyone exhausted, but the discovery of the chapel in the old photographs had brought a new breath of life to the investigation. "It must be around here," said Mrs. Gable, consulting an old map she had brought from home. Her wrinkled fingers traced a path between the centuries-old trees. The chapel was hidden behind a grove of serviceberry trees. Joe Santos said it was the safest place on the property. Lily, who walked hand in hand with her aunt, stopped suddenly. Her eyes scanned the landscape with a peculiar intensity. "The shadows are different here," she said. "They're dancing, as if they're happy to see us." Damien consulted the coordinates on the GPS once again. "We're close. According to these numbers on the necklace, the chapel should be—" He stopped, looking ahead with surprise. There! Through the mist, a structure began to materialize. It was a small and simple building, its stone walls covered in ivy and moss. Time had been merciless to the place, but it still maintained a silent dignity in its abandonment. "Grandpa came here every morning," said Claire, her voice choked with emotion. "Mom used to say that he talked to the walls. Now I understand. He was protecting his secrets." Chief Silver examined the structure with experienced eyes. "The construction is older than the rest of the property," he observed. "It seems to have been built in the early last century." "It was Lily's great-grandfather who built it," said Mrs. Gable, adjusting her glasses. "Edward Santos. He was known for his talent with stones. They said he could make the rocks keep secrets." While the adults talked, Lily had approached the entrance to the chapel. Her small hands touched the old stones with reverence. "There's something here," she murmured. "The shadows are showing me a pattern in the stones." Damien approached, illuminating the wall with his flashlight. At first glance, the stones seemed randomly arranged, but under closer inspection, a subtle pattern began to emerge. "They're musical notes!" exclaimed Claire, her eyes widening in surprise. "Look at the way the stones are arranged. They form a musical score." "The music of the safe," whispered Lily. "But it's different here. There are more notes." Mrs. Gable rummaged through her bag, pulling out a few more old photographs. "Look at this," she said, showing a particular image. "This photo was taken on the day of your grandparents' wedding, Claire. See the detail in the background? It's the chapel, and there are people carrying something inside, something big." "A piano," said the chief, approaching to see the photo better. "They put a piano inside the chapel." "Grandma's piano!" exclaimed Lily, her eyes shining with excitement. "The shadows always show her playing, always the same music." Carefully, the group entered the chapel. The interior was surprisingly well preserved, protected from the elements by the thick stone walls. And there, covered by an old tarpaulin, was an upright piano. "It's amazing that it's still here," commented Damien, carefully removing the tarpaulin. A cloud of dust danced in the air, illuminated by the first rays of sun that entered through the narrow windows. Lily approached the instrument as if drawn by a magnet. Her small hands touched the yellowed keys with delicacy. To everyone's surprise, the piano, although out of tune, still worked. "Grandma taught me," she said softly, beginning to play the melody that had haunted the Santos family for so long. Her small hands moved with a supernatural certainty over the keys. As the music echoed through the old walls, something extraordinary began to happen. The shadows on the walls seemed to dance, not just for Lily, but for everyone present. It was as if the chapel itself were awakening from a long sleep. "There!" shouted Claire, pointing to a specific point on the wall behind the piano. "The stone! It's moving!" Indeed, one of the stones had shifted slightly out of the wall. Chief Silver approached cautiously, illuminating the space with his flashlight. Inside the newly revealed cavity, there was an old metal box. "It's the same as the one we found in the basement of the farm," observed Damien. "But this one looks older." Carefully, they removed the box from its hiding place. The lock was old, but the mechanism still worked perfectly. Inside, they found something that made everyone hold their breath. A set of perfectly preserved documents, dating back more than 50 years. "They're the original deeds," said the chief, examining the papers, "not just for Oakhaven Ranch, but for all the properties in the region. And there's more. Bank records, contracts, a list of names." "Wait," interrupted Claire, picking up a yellowed envelope that was at the bottom of the box. "This is my father's handwriting." With trembling hands, she opened the envelope. Inside, there was a letter written a few days before Joe Santos departed this world. "My dear daughter, if you are reading this, it means that you have finally discovered the truth about our family gift. They are not hallucinations nor mystical visions. It is the ability to see the truth even when it hides in the shadows. Your sister had this gift, as did your mother, and now I see that little Lily also possesses it. What Arthur Manning and his cronies never understood is that our real treasure was never the land or the water. It was our ability to see beyond appearances, to see the truth when others see only shadows. In this box, you will find all the evidence needed to expose not only the land fraud, but a much larger scheme that spans decades. But the most important thing is at the bottom of the box. A will signed by your great-grandfather Edward Santos, which makes clear that the lands of the region could never be sold or transferred. They belong to the community, a common heritage that should be preserved forever. The piano is not just an instrument, it is the key to all our secrets. The music that your mother played so much is not just a melody, it is a code, a map that leads to other hiding places, other evidence that I distributed throughout the property. Protect Lily. She will have to carry this gift, this responsibility, but unlike us, she will not need to carry it alone. You are with her now, and I know you will find people who will help her understand and use her gift for good. With love, your father, Joe Santos. When Claire finished reading the letter, tears streamed silently down her face. Lily, who had listened to every word attentively, returned to the piano. Her small hands began to play the melody again, but this time it was different. She was improvising, adding notes, creating a new version of the ancestral music. "Look!" exclaimed Mrs. Gable, pointing to the walls. The shadows were dancing. Again, but now they seemed to reveal other patterns, other secrets hidden in the old chapel. "There's more," said Lily without stopping playing. "Much more. The shadows are showing me other places, other boxes, other evidence. Grandpa hid everything, but only someone who can see the shadows can find it." The sun had risen completely. Now, its lights crossing the colored stained glass windows of the chapel, creating a kaleidoscope of colors that danced on the old walls. It was as if the place itself was celebrating the revelation of its secrets. In Claire's pocket, her phone vibrated. It was a message from Sergeant Oliver. Richard Manning had just made a full confession, revealing details of a scheme that went far beyond Harmony Creek, far beyond the lands and the water. It was a web of corruption and power that spanned decades. But there, in that old chapel, under the music played by a 6-year-old girl who could see the truth in the shadows, something bigger was happening. It was the beginning of a change, a revelation that could no longer be contained. The shadows continued dancing, and Lily continued, playing, each note revealing yet another secret, yet another truth that had been hidden for so long. And somewhere, in the depths of the earth beneath the chapel, pure and crystal-clear water continued to flow, waiting for the moment to be shared with everyone, as it should have always been. The news of the discoveries in the chapel spread quickly through Harmony Creek. As the sun rose in the sky, more and more residents began to gather around the old Santos property. Among them was Mr. Jenkins, who had closed his bakery for the first time in 20 years, and several other local merchants. and farmers whose families had been affected by Arthur Manning's schemes. Inside the chapel, Lily continued at the piano, her small hands moving with a supernatural certainty over the keys. Each new variation of the melody seemed to reveal more secrets hidden in the old stone walls. Claire watched her niece with a mixture of awe and concern, beginning to truly understand the weight of the gift that her family carried. "There's something different happening with the shadows," said Lily suddenly, her hands pausing over the keys. "They're trying to show me the basement of Grandma Josephine's house." Mrs. Gable, who was organizing the old photographs in chronological order, raised her head abruptly. "The old Santos house? But it's been closed for years." "Not exactly," interjected Chief Silver, who had just returned from a call. "According to Richard Manning, Arthur kept constant surveillance on the property. He believed there were more documents hidden there." Damien, who was meticulously examining the papers found in the metal box, raised a specific sheet. "Look at this," he said, showing a yellow document. "It's an old plan of the Santos house, and there are notes on the margins, coordinates just like on the necklace." "The same notes!" exclaimed Lily, returning to play. "The music, it forms a map. Each sequence of notes is a different place where Grandpa hid the evidence." Chief Silver immediately began organizing a team to investigate the old house. But before they could leave, a growing murmur from outside the chapel drew everyone's attention. "You need to see this," shouted Sergeant Oliver, rushing into the chapel. "Arthur Manning, he tried to—" "What happened?" asked Claire, her heart racing. "He tried to bribe one of the guards to deliver a message," explained the sergeant, catching his breath. "But it wasn't a common message. It was a musical score." Lily immediately left the piano, running to see the paper that the sergeant was holding. Her eyes scanned the notes quickly. "It's a warning," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "The shadows, they're showing me. There's something that will happen at noon." "What time is it now?" asked Damien, consulting his watch. 11:15. We have 45 minutes. It was then that Mrs. Gable let out a muffled exclamation. Among the photographs she was organizing, she had found one especially significant. It showed Joe Santos in his office at Oakhaven Ranch, and in the background, partially visible, was a calendar with a circled annotation. "It's today," she said, her voice trembling. The date circled on the calendar. "It's today, 20 years later." Claire took the photograph, examining it attentively. "There's something written on the margin," she said, bringing the photo closer to the light. It looks like a warning." "Automatic protection system," read Damien over her shoulder. "Programmed to activate in 20 years if the evidence wasn't revealed," completed Lily, her eyes wide. "The shadows are agitated. There's something in the old computers, something that Grandpa programmed." Chief Silver immediately grabbed his radio, contacting the technical team that was still at Oakhaven Ranch, investigating the computers found in the basement. "Attention! Do not turn off any equipment. I repeat, keep all systems active." But Lily was already back at the piano, her hands flying over the keys in a melody more complex than any she had played before. "It's not just a warning," she said, without stopping playing. "It's a key. The music, it's a code to prevent something bad from happening." Damien, with his expertise in technology, began to make frenetic notes, converting the musical notes into numerical sequences. "It's binary code," he exclaimed. "Joe Santos transformed the music into a programming sequence." "But why?" asked Claire, her voice filled with worry. "What happens at noon?" It was then that Richard Manning, who had been brought to the chapel under police escort, spoke for the first time since his arrival. "The financial system," he said, his face pale. "Joe Santos programmed something into the bank's computers, something that would automatically reveal all the fraudulent transactions of the last 30 years. Not only that," he continued, running his hands over his tired face, "he created A system that would automatically transfer all the diverted funds back to a community account, all the resources stolen from the town, all the properties taken illegally. Everything would be returned to the community. An astonished silence fell over the chapel. Outside, the murmur of the crowd grew. More and more residents were arriving, attracted by the rumors that great revelations were about to come. "That's why Arthur was so desperate," said Claire, beginning to understand. It wasn't just about hiding the past. It was about preventing Dad's plan from being completed. Lily continued playing, her small hands tireless on the keys of the piano. The shadows on the walls of the chapel danced ever more intensely, as if responding to the urgency of the moment. "There's more," she said, her voice acquiring that tone of ancient wisdom that sometimes emerged. "The shadows are showing me there is another place, a place that no one knows, not even Uncle Richard." Richard approached the piano, his eyes fixed on the shadows that now everyone could see dancing on the walls. "Joe Santos told me once," he said slowly, "that there was one last secret, something that only someone with the gift could find." "The source!" exclaimed Mrs. Gable suddenly. "The source of pure water. It's not at Oakhaven Ranch. That's just a distraction." Lily's hands moved to a new melody, one that no one had heard before. The shadows on the walls changed their pattern, forming what appeared to be a map. "The real source," she said without stopping playing, "is under the chapel. Grandpa built all this to protect not only the documents, but the water too. It belongs to everyone," he said in the shadows. "It cannot be sold or controlled." The clock. Now read 11:40. In 20 minutes, the system programmed by Joe Santos would be activated, revealing decades of corruption and returning to the community what had been stolen from it. But as Lily continued playing, translating the music into code and the code into truth, something even bigger was about to be revealed. In the depths of the earth, beneath the ancient foundations of the chapel, the pure water that Joe Santos had protected for so long was beginning to find new paths to the surface. The shadows danced, the music flowed, and in a small chapel in rural West Virginia, a 6-year-old girl with an extraordinary gift was about to complete the work that her grandfather had begun 2 decades before. The tension inside the chapel grew, along with the minutes leading up to noon. Lily continued at the piano, her small hands now moving in a complex dance over the keys, translating the musical code that Joe Santos had left as his last defense against the corruption that plagued Harmony Creek. Outside, the crowd had grown significantly. The murmur of voices mixed with the sound of the piano that escaped through the narrow windows of the chapel. Among those present, old stories began to be shared, memories of lost lands, of suspicious deals, of lives altered by the schemes of Arthur Manning and his cronies. Inside the chapel, Damien worked frantically on his laptop, converting the musical sequences into computer code. Sergeant Oliver maintained constant communication with the technical team at Oakhaven Ranch, where the old computers remained active, awaiting the programmed moment. 11:50, announced Chief Silver, consulting his watch. 10 minutes for Joe Santos's program to be activated. It was then that Claire, who was examining once again the documents found in the metal box, made a disturbing discovery. "Wait," she said, her voice trembling. "There's something here that doesn't make sense. These bank transfers, some are dated after Dad, after he was gone." Richard Manning, still in police custody, approached to see the documents. His face paled visibly. "It's not possible," he murmured. "These signatures, they're different from the others." "Someone was forging Joe Santos's signature even after his departure," concluded the chief, taking the documents to examine more closely. "But who?" "The music teacher," exclaimed Mrs. Gable suddenly. Everyone turned to her, surprised. The elderly lady rummaged through her bag, looking for yet another of her precious photographs. Here, Professor Albert Miller. He gave piano lessons to the children of the town, including Lily's mother. The photograph showed a group of children around a piano with a middle-aged man in the center. But what caught the attention was not the teacher, but what was partially visible on the wall behind him, a series of sheet music that seemed strangely similar to the musical annotations found in Joe Santos's documents. He wasn't just a music. "And teacher," said Richard, running his hands over his tired face. Albert Miller was an expert in document forgery. He had worked for Arthur for years, disguised as a teacher. The music was just his cover. Lily, without stopping playing, spoke, with that supernatural certainty that she sometimes possessed. "He's still in town. The shadows show him. He's at the bank right now, trying to get into the system." Chief Silver immediately grabbed his radio, ordering a team to be sent to the bank. But Damien, still working on his laptop, made an alarming discovery. "He's not trying to get into the system," he said, his eyes fixed on the screen. "He's trying to overload it. If the old computers on the farm are overloaded before noon, Dad's program won't be activated," completed Claire, horror in her voice. "All the evidence will be lost." It was at that moment that Lily began to play, a completely new melody, one that no one had heard before. The shadows on the walls of the chapel began to dance differently, more urgently, more focused. "It's not just a code," she said, her childish voice laden with understanding. "It's a counterattack. Grandpa knew that someone might try to stop the program. He left a special protection in the notes themselves." Damien watched in awe as new codes appeared on his laptop, generated by the melody that Lily played. "It's incredible," he exclaimed. "Joe Santos didn't just create a program, he created a musical defense. Each note that Lily plays is generating a firewall, protecting the original system." Meanwhile, at the bank, Albert Miller typed frantically on an old computer, desperately trying to prevent the inevitable. But each command he sent was neutralized by an invisible barrier, a protection created by the music of a 6-year-old girl who had never played the piano before that day. "5 minutes," announced Chief Silver. It was then that a different sound began to emerge from the depths of the chapel, a sound of running water growing louder and louder. The stone floor began to vibrate gently, and small streams of crystal-clear water began to spring up between the cracks in the stones. "The source!" exclaimed Mrs. Gable. "It's awakening!" Lily continued playing, but now her hands seemed moved by something beyond herself. The music had transformed into something primordial, a melody that seemed to come from the earth itself. The shadows on the walls not only danced, they told a story, revealed a greater truth that was about to come to light. 3 minutes, said the chief. At the police station, Arthur Manning had completely lost his composure. He shouted in his cell, begging to be heard, promising to reveal even more names, more schemes, more buried truths. But it was too late. Lily's music had unleashed something that could no longer be stopped. 1 minute! The water that sprang from the floor of the chapel now formed small streams, flowing towards the doors. Outside, the crowd watched in reverent silence as the crystal-clear water began to run down the steps of the entrance. 30 seconds. On the computers at Oakhaven Ranch, lights flashed frantically. At the bank, Albert Miller watched helplessly as his commands were systematically blocked and reversed. In his cell, Arthur Manning had finally silenced, realizing that his empire of lies was about to crumble. 10 seconds. Lily played the last sequence of notes, her small hands moving with supernatural precision over the keys. The shadows on the walls reached a crescendo of movement, as if the entire chapel were alive, pulsating with an ancient and powerful energy. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. At noon sharp, several events happened simultaneously. All the Computers at the Harmony Creek Bank began to automatically print thousands of pages of fraudulent transaction records. At Oak Haven Ranch, the old servers activated Joe Santos's program, initiating a series of transfers that would begin to return to the community everything that had been stolen from it. But the most impressive thing happened in the chapel. The water that sprang from the floor had transformed into a small fountain, gushing crystal clear and pure. The shadows on the walls had turned into a kind of living tapestry, revealing not only the history of the Santos family, but the history of all of Harmony Creek, a story of resistance, of protection, of truth kept in the shadows until the right moment to come to light. And in the center of everything, a 6-year-old girl continued playing, her music now mingling with the sound of the water, creating a symphony that spoke of secrets revealed, of justice restored, of a heritage preserved through generations until the exact moment when it should be discovered. The truth, as the shadows had shown Lily, was greater than anyone had imagined. And as noon turned into early afternoon in Harmony Creek, a new story began to be written. A story of redemption, of renewal, and of a gift passed through generations that had finally found its true purpose. The hours that followed noon in Harmony Creek were of profound revelations and transformations. The water that sprang from the floor of the chapel had transformed into a small stream that snaked through the grounds. As if the earth itself were returning to the surface, everything it had kept for so long. The crowd outside had grown even larger, and stories began to circulate. Stories of hope, of justice, of a town that was finally beginning to awaken from a long nightmare. Inside the chapel, Lily finally stopped playing. Her small hands, after hours at the piano, trembled slightly, but her eyes shone with a special light. Claire ran to hug her niece, silent tears streaming down her face. "The shadows are different now," said Lily, her voice soft but firm. "They're not scared anymore. They're happy." Damien, still at his laptop, watched in awe as the results of Joe Santos's program unfolded. "It's impressive," he said, showing the screen to Chief Silver. "The system isn't just returning the diverted money, it's reconstructing the entire history of the fraud, showing exactly how each scheme worked." Sergeant Oliver rushed into the chapel, his face revealing urgent news. "Chief, you need to see this. Albert Miller is confessing everything. And it's not just about the forgeries, he was involved in something much bigger." Richard Manning, who remained seated in a corner under police guard, raised his head. "The laboratory," he said, his voice laden with guilt. "That's why we needed to control the water source so much. It wasn't just for the water itself. It was for what was in it," completed Mrs. Gable, who was leafing through an old diary found among the documents. "Joe Santos discovered something in the composition of that water, something that made it special." Claire took the diary, her eyes quickly scanning the yellowed pages. "Healing properties," she murmured. Dad had discovered that the water had unique components, minerals that didn't exist anywhere else. "That's why Arthur was so desperate," said Richard. "The laboratory he was building secretly. It wasn't just for water analysis. He intended to synthesize those components, patent them. It would be an incalculable fortune." Lily, who had approached the fountain that now sprang from the floor of the chapel, bent down to touch the water. "It sings," she said simply, "like the music of the piano. It has a rhythm, a melody of its own." It was then that Damien made another discovery on his laptop. "Wait, there's something else in the files that are being released. They seem to be medical records." "The experiments," said Richard, his face a mask of shame. "Arthur wasn't just stealing lands and diverting money. He was secretly testing the water on patients at the local hospital." Chief Silver immediately grabbed his radio, ordering a complete investigation into the hospital. But Lily, still crouching by the fountain, spoke again. "It wasn't just at the hospital. The shadows show Other places, private clinics, offices, the clinic where Mom is, exclaimed Claire, a horrible realization taking over her face. The drugs they were giving her, they weren't just to keep her confused. They were testing something on her. At that moment, Dr. Frank Meyer, director of the Harmony Creek Hospital, entered the chapel. His face was pale, and he carried a thick folder of documents. "I came as soon as I found out," he said, his voice trembling. "I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. They're all the records of the experiments with the water. Arthur forced me to participate, threatened my family." Chief Silver took the folder, beginning to examine its contents with growing concern. "This is much bigger than we imagined," he said. "It wasn't just a local matter. There were international investors involved, pharmaceutical laboratories." "The music knew," said Lily softly. Everyone turned to look at her. "The notes that Grandpa wrote, they weren't just a code for the computer. They were a warning, a map. Each melody tells a different part of the story." She returned to the piano, beginning to play a new sequence of notes. The shadows on the walls of the chapel began to dance again, but now they formed clearer images, figures of people, places, events that had happened over the years. "There!" exclaimed Mrs. Gable, pointing to one of the shadows. "That shape! It's the old research house that existed in the back of the hospital. They demolished it 15 years ago after a mysterious fire." Dr. Meyer nodded gravely. "That's where it started. The first tests with the water, the first discoveries about its special properties. But when some patients began to present extraordinary results, Arthur decided that he needed to control everything: the water, the lands, the experiments." "And Richard," asked Claire, turning to the man who remained in custody, "what was your true role in all this?" Richard took a deep breath before answering. "I was the contact with the international laboratories. I faked my own disappearance to be able to operate freely, establish connections, prepare the ground for when Arthur was ready to reveal his discovery to the world." "But you changed your mind," said Lily, stopping playing for a moment. "The shadows show you started to help Grandpa in secret." "Yes," admitted Richard, tears in his eyes. "When I saw what Arthur was willing to do, manipulate people, destroy lives, use patients as guinea pigs, I couldn't continue. I started to help Joe Santos document everything, create protections, hide the evidence." At that moment, the sound of a helicopter cut through the air. Outside the chapel, the crowd stirred. Chief Silver received a message on his radio. "The federal police are arriving," he announced. "The records that Joe Santos's program released activated alerts in Washington. This goes far beyond Harmony Creek." Claire hugged Lily protectively. "And now, what happens to the water, to the lands?" It was then that Mrs. Gable found yet another document in the metal box. A will, not from Joe Santos, but from his father, Edward Santos. "Here it is," she said, reading the document in a trembling voice. "Edward Santos left specific instructions. The source and the lands around it should become a public asset, managed by a community council. The water could never be commercialized or commercially exploited. It should be a shared resource, used for the good of all." Lily returned to the piano one last time. The melody she played now was different from all the others. It was soft, hopeful, like a new dawn after a long night. "The shadows are showing the future," she said, her fingers dancing gently on the keys. "I see people being healed, the town growing. Again, everyone sharing the water, taking care of it together." And as the music flowed, mingling with the sound of the water that continued to spring from the floor of the chapel, something extraordinary happened. The shadows on the walls began to transform into light, as if the place itself were freeing, itself from decades of secrets and darkness. Outside, the afternoon sun bathed Harmony Creek in a golden glow. The news of the discoveries was already spreading through the region, and more people arrived every moment, not only local residents, but also journalists, investigators, people in search of answers and of hope. But inside the chapel, a 6-year-old girl continued playing her music of healing and revelation, her small hands guided by a gift that transcended generations, a gift that was no longer a curse to be feared, but a light to guide the way to a better future. The days that followed in Harmony Creek were of intense transformations. The small town in rural West Virginia became the center of attention of the national media, with reporters and television crews occupying every available room in the local inns. The Santos Chapel, with its newly discovered source, had transformed into a symbol of hope and renewal. Claire watched all these changes with a mixture of awe and concern. Sitting on one of the benches in the chapel, now protected by a special police team, she held a set of documents that had just arrived from the clinic where her mother was interned. "The exams confirmed," she said to Damien, who was analyzing other papers on his laptop. "Mom didn't have Alzheimer's. The drugs they were giving her were deliberately altering her perception, trying to block her gift." Lily, who was playing near the fountain with some of the town's children, stopped to listen to the conversation. "Grandma is getting better," she said with her characteristic certainty. "The shadows show she's starting to see again." Indeed, since they had suspended the irregular medication, Josephine Santos had shown surprising improvements. Dr. Meyer, who was now fully cooperating with the investigations, had confirmed that the drugs administered to her were part of an elaborate scheme to silence key witnesses. "We found something else," said Sergeant Oliver, entering the chapel with a new folder. Records of other people who were interned over the years. They all had something in common. They manifested signs of the same gift as the Santos family. Mrs. Gable, who had become a constant presence in the chapel, organizing and cataloging historical documents, raised her eyes from her notes. "There have always been stories," she said. "People who said they saw things in the shadows, who could perceive hidden truths. Most ended up being interned or left the town mysteriously." Chief Silver, who was coordinating the investigations in conjunction with the federal police, approached the group with news. "We just interrogated Albert Miller again," he informed them. "He revealed something interesting about the water from the source." Everyone approached to listen, including Richard Manning, who was now assisting the authorities in exchange for a possible sentence reduction. His knowledge of Arthur's schemes was proving invaluable to the investigations. "According to Albert," continued the chief, "the water didn't just have healing properties, it seemed to amplify certain natural abilities. In ordinary people, it produced beneficial effects on health, but in people with the Santos family gift, it increased their ability to see the truth," completed Richard. "That's why Arthur became so obsessed with controlling the source. He didn't just want to commercialize the water, he wanted to understand and control the gift." Lily, who had approached the fountain again, placed her small hands on the crystal-clear water. "The music is in the water," she said, as if the water itself sang. "That's why Grandpa used melodies to protect the secrets. He could hear the music of the water." At that moment, a group of scientists who had been called to analyze the source presented their preliminary results. The composition of the water was unique, with a combination of minerals never before documented. "But there's something else," said Dr. Patricia Cole, leader of the scientific team. "We detected vibratory patterns in the water that we couldn't explain. It's as if it emitted its own frequency, a kind of molecular music." Claire exchanged a meaningful look with Damien. In recent days, since the truth had begun to come to light, they had grown closer, united by the desire to protect Lily and preserve the legacy of the Santos family. "Grandpa knew," said Lily, still with her hands on the water. "The shadows are showing. He discovered that the music and the water were the same thing. That's why he built the piano here. That's why he hid everything in melodies." It was then that Mr. Jenkins rushed into the chapel, carrying an old newspaper. "Look what I found in the bakery archive," he exclaimed. "A report from 50 years ago about a musical presentation at the chapel. Edward Santos, Lily's great-grandfather, organized a concert here. And look at the date." "The day the source was sealed," murmured Mrs. Gable, recognizing the date. "Edward must have used the music to protect the water, just as Joe used it later." Dr. Meyer, who was examining the city's historical medical records, made another surprising discovery. "There are reports of inexplicable healings after that concert," he said. "People who drank from the spring's water while the music played. It seems the effect was amplified somehow." Lily returned to the piano, her small hands naturally finding the keys. The melody she began to play was unlike any before. It was as if she was translating the water's music itself into sounds everyone could hear. The shadows on the chapel walls began to dance again, but now they projected images of the distant past. Edward Santos playing the same piano, the water springing forth for the first time, people gathering to share its gift. "There's one more thing," Richard said, his voice trembling slightly. "Something Arthur discovered that drove him mad with ambition. The water doesn't just act on people, it affects the land itself. Crops near the spring, they grow differently, stronger, healthier." "It's true," confirmed Mr. Jenkins. "We always thought it strange how the crops on the Santos land were more productive than others. We figured it was just good management." Dr. Cole consulted her data again. "Soil tests confirm it. There's a significant alteration in the mineral composition within several miles of the spring. It's as if the water is healing the land itself." It was then that Claire received a call that would change everything again. It was from the clinic where Josephine was staying. Her mother had woken up completely lucid for the first time in years, and her first words were about another place, a place no one had considered yet. "She spoke about a second chapel," Claire said, hanging up the phone with trembling hands. "One built by great-grandfather Edward in the mountains, connected to this one by underground tunnels, a place where he kept something even more important than the water." Lily stopped playing, her eyes fixed on something only she could see. "The shadows know the way," she said. "They always have. They were waiting for the right moment to show us." And so, as the sun began to set over Harmony Creek, casting long shadows across the chapel windows, a new phase of the story began to unfold. The Santos family's gift, which for so long had been seen as a curse, was about to reveal its true purpose, not just to heal and protect, but to reconnect people with something much deeper and older that they had forgotten. The water continued to flow, the music continued to echo, and on the walls of the old chapel the shadows danced with a promise of even greater revelations to come. Lily, with her small hands on the piano and her extraordinary gift, was just beginning to discover the true extent of her heritage. Dawn in Harmony Creek brought a different atmosphere that morning. A week had passed since the great revelations in the chapel, and the whole town seemed to breathe renewed air. The news that Josephine Santos had completely recovered her lucidity spread quickly, bringing with it a wave of hope and possibilities. Claire watched her mother with tears in her eyes, as Josephine, now free from the medications that had kept her confused for so long, walked with firm steps across the old Santos property. Lily held her grandmother's hand, her small steps synchronized with hers, as if they shared an internal rhythm only they could hear. "It's here," Josephine said, stopping before a set of rocks that seemed too natural to be a coincidence. "Edward built the entrance to the tunnels at this point. He knew that one day we would need to find the way." Damien, who in recent days had become not only an ally, but a pillar of support for the family, examined the rock formation with a technical eye. "There are markings here," he observed, pointing to almost imperceptible carvings in the stone. "They look like musical notes." "They are the same notes," Lily exclaimed, letting go of her grandmother's hand and running to touch the markings. "The music the water sings, that Grandpa used to protect the secrets." Chief Silver, accompanied by a team specializing in underground explorations, approached the group. After recent events, the police had decided to maintain constant protection over the Santos family and investigate each new discovery with extreme caution. "Soil analyses confirm it," he said, consulting a report. "There is a network of natural tunnels under this area, some of them artificially modified decades ago." Mrs. Gable, who even in her advanced age made a point of participating in every new discovery, opened her inseparable folder of old photographs. "I found one more thing," she said, showing a yellowed image. "This photo was taken during the construction of the main chapel. Look what's in the background." The photograph showed workers carrying equipment, but what caught the eye was a structure partially visible on top of a distant hill. A second chapel, smaller than the first, but with a distinctly similar architecture. "The Chapel of the Dawn," Josephine said, her voice laden with long-suppressed memories. "That's what Dad called it. He said it was where the sun rose first, bringing light to the secrets of the night." Richard Manning, who after his cooperation with the authorities had been granted permission to assist in the investigations under supervision, studied an old map of the region. "The tunnels weren't just for connecting the chapels," he explained. "Edward Santos created a complex system that distributed the spring water throughout the region, using gravity and the natural channels of the land." It was then that Lily, who was exploring the rocks with the curiosity of her age, made a surprising discovery. "There's a different mark here," she called out. It looks like Mom's necklace." Everyone came closer to see. Indeed, etched discreetly into one of the stones was a symbol identical to the pendant that Lily still carried with her. Josephine touched the mark with trembling fingers. "It's the key," she said softly. "Not just to open doors, but to understand everything." Edward wasn't just protecting the water. He was preserving something much older, something he found when he dug the first wells. Carefully, Lily fit the pendant into the mark on the rock. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a soft sound began to emerge from the rocks themselves, a melody as if the earth were singing. "The music of the water," she exclaimed, her eyes shining with excitement. "It's the same. The stones are singing." Slowly, as if responding to the music, part of the rock formation began to move, revealing a passage that sloped gently into the earth. The air that emerged from the opening was cool and carried a peculiar aroma, like freshly fallen rain on fertile soil. "Incredible," murmured Dr. Patricia Cole, who had arrived with her team of scientists to document the discovery. "The opening system must use resonance principles. The vibrations of the music activate some kind of internal mechanism." "It's not mechanical," Lily interrupted, already starting to descend the first steps of the passage. "It's the earth itself, responding. Like when we play the piano, the music makes the shadows dance because they want to, not because they're forced." Claire made a motion to hold her niece back, but Josephine stopped her with a gentle gesture. "Let her go first," she said. "The gift guides her. She knows the way better than any of us." The descent through the tunnels was a surreal experience. The walls weren't simply rocky, they were gently undulating, as if they had been shaped by water over centuries. In some places, small crystals encrusted in the stone reflected the light from the lanterns, creating patterns that resembled the musical notes found in the chapel. "Edward didn't build this," Richard said, marveling at the structure of the tunnel. He found something that already existed and just harmonized with it. After what seemed like an eternity walking through the tunnels, always following Lily, who seemed guided by an internal compass, the group arrived at a natural chamber that took everyone's breath away. It was a circular space with a high ceiling from which hung crystalline formations that emitted a soft, bluish light. In the center of the chamber was a small lake of crystal-clear water, and on the walls was the true revelation. Ancient paintings, much older than Harmony Creek itself, showed people gathered around water sources, some of them with expressions that suggested they could also see in the shadows. "We weren't the first," whispered Josephine, tears streaming down her face. "The gift, it's always been here, passing from generation to generation, long before our family, long before any of us." Lily approached the central lake, her small hands gently touching the surface of the water. At the moment of contact, something extraordinary happened. The crystals on the ceiling began to pulse with more intensity, and a soft, ancient and familiar music, at the same time, began to echo through the chamber. "It's the music," she exclaimed, with joy. "The same music that's everywhere, in the water, in the stones, in the shadows. It's the music of the earth." Dr. Cole and her team were in ecstasy, collecting samples and taking measurements. "The properties of this water are even more extraordinary than those of the chapel," she said, consulting her instruments. "And these crystals, I've never seen anything like it. They seem to respond to specific sound patterns." It was then that Damien, who was examining the paintings on the walls carefully, made a crucial discovery. "Look at this," he called out, illuminating a specific section of the drawings. "They're not just historical records, they're instructions." Indeed, the paintings told a story, not only of the past, but of the future. They showed how the water should be shared, how the gift should be preserved and passed on, how the music of the earth should be kept alive through the generations. "That's why Arthur never really managed to control anything," Richard said, finally understanding. "It wasn't something that could be owned or traded. It was a legacy for everyone, a gift that only works when it's shared." At that moment, Lily began to sing, a simple, pure melody that seemed to emerge not only from her, but from the chamber itself. The shadows on the walls came to life, no longer frightening or mysterious, but welcoming and revealing. "The shadows were never our enemies," she said, her childish voice laden with ancient wisdom. "They were our teachers, trying to show us the way back home." In the days and weeks that followed, Harmony Creek transformed profoundly. The main chapel and the Chapel of the Dawn were restored and transformed into centers for research and healing, where the water was shared freely with all who needed it. The tunnels and the ancient chamber were preserved and protected, not as secrets to be hidden, but as reminders of the deep connection between people and the land they inhabited. Arthur Manning and his accomplices faced justice for their crimes, but the real transformation happened in the community itself. The lands were returned, the waters flowed freely again, and something deeper began to awaken in people. An ancient awareness, an ability to see beyond appearances, to hear the music that had always been there. Lily continued to grow, her gift flourishing under the loving guidance of her aunt and grandmother. Other children began to demonstrate similar abilities, and the chapel became a place of learning and discovery, where the gift was no longer feared or suppressed, but celebrated and nurtured. Claire and Damien grew closer, united not only by the love that grew between them, but by a shared commitment to protect and preserve the legacy they had discovered. Mrs. Gable continued to collect and organize stories, now not only in photographs, but in a living archive of memories and traditions that would be passed on. And on clear nights, when the moon bathed Harmony Creek with its silvery light, Anyone passing near the chapel could still hear a soft music, the sound of a girl playing the piano, her small hands translating into melody the ancient song of the earth, of the waters, and of the shadows that after all were never darkness, but guardians of the light that had always been within each of us, waiting for the right moment to shine.